Hi, crime enthusiasts. This is your host Ashita, and the story I have for you today is about a 20-year-old student at St. John's University in rural Minnesota. It was a bitterly cold night on November 9th, 2002, when Josh Gilmont, a brilliant and ambitious young man, left a friendly poker game with his classmates and stepped out into the darkness. The party had wrapped around 11:45 p.m., and Josh, who was known for his sharp mind and aspirations for Yale Law School, headed off alone towards his dorm. The walk back should have taken him less than 3 minutes, but Josh never made it back. Somewhere between that room full of friends and his residence, just a few hundred yards away, he vanished, without a sound, without a witness, and without leaving a single trace behind. The research that followed was swift and relentless. Police, volunteers, and search dogs combed the campus, drained nearby lakes, and scoured the dense woods that surround the university. Yet, nothing was found. No phone, no wallet, no footprints in the frost-covered ground. It was as if Josh had simply ceased to exist. In the years since, his disappearance has morphed into one of Minnesota's most baffling and haunting cold cases. Was Josh the victim of a random predator? Did he stumble across something or someone he wasn't meant to see? Or is it possible that the truth lies much closer within the shadows of the very campus he once called safe? This is the story of Josh Gilmont, and this time I'm not just asking where he went, I'm asking who wanted him gone. Josh Gilmont wasn't your average college student. To those who knew him best, he was a natural-born leader, ambitious, sharp-witted, and unshakably driven. A young man with a purpose far greater than himself. Hailing from the small town of Maple Lake, Minnesota, Josh had always known exactly where he was headed. In high school, he wore multiple crowns: valedictorian, class president, and the unofficial title of young politician. He wasn't just popular, he was respected. He had a fire in him, a sense of justice that burned deep. He didn't just want to become a lawyer, he wanted to change the system. He dreamed of one day walking the halls of Yale Law School, of serving in the Minnesota State Legislature, and if you asked him, to eventually sit behind the desk in the Oval Office as the President of the United States. But those dreams came to an abrupt and chilling halt on the 9th of November 2002. That Saturday had started like any other on the picturesque campus of St. John's University, a quiet, woodsy college tucked away in Collegeville, Minnesota. Josh began his day in the library, buried in research for a paper he was writing on Alexander Hamilton, an appropriate subject for a man with political ambition and razor-sharp intellect. That evening, he returned to his dorm, met up with some close friends, Alex Jade and Greg Wharton, and shared a casual dinner, the kind they would had countless times before. Nothing about the day raised alarms. Nothing hinted at the storm that was coming. Later that night, around 11:15 to 11:30 p.m., the trio headed over to their friend Nate Slinkard's dorm for a low-key poker night. The group played cards, drank a few beers, laughed, and relaxed. College students doing what college students do. At around 11:45 p.m., Josh stood up and left the gathering without fanfare. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't grab his coat, his wallet, his glasses, or his car keys. He simply walked out into the cold November night alone and began the short 3-minute walk back to his own dorm. He never made it. By the next afternoon, His friends began to feel uneasy. Josh wasn't answering calls or messages, and no one had seen him since he left the night before. The worry escalated quickly. He wasn't the kind of person to disappear. He had responsibilities, deadlines, ambitions. Disappearing without a trace wasn't simply in his character. By 10:30 that night, nearly 24 hours after anyone had last seen Josh, his parents were finally informed. And just like that, a missing persons case was opened and a mystery that would haunt Minnesota for decades had begun. Authorities initially leaned toward a tragic but seemingly plausible explanation. Perhaps Josh had been more intoxicated than anyone realized. Maybe he lost his bearings on the dark, poorly lit campus paths and accidentally fell into one of the surrounding lakes. Stump Lake, in particular, sat directly along the route he would have taken back to his dorm. It seemed like the most logical place to look. The search of Stump Lake was immediate and intense. Authorities dragged the waters, dispatched sonar-equipped boats, and sent in divers. The campus transformed into a search grid with police, volunteers, and cadaver dogs combing every inch of the land. From the ground to the air, they searched, but nothing turned up. Not a single piece of clothing, not a footprint, not even his glasses, something he depended on daily. It was as if Josh had vanished into thin air. Nick Hydakovich, Josh's roommate at the time, would later recall watching those grim series with a surreal sense of dread. In an interview with Unsolved Mysteries, he said, "Seeing that lake being dragged was the most surreal, probably awful memory I have. Winter was approaching fast, and with the freezing temperatures, the search of the lakes had to be put on hold. If Josh's body was in the water, it wouldn't surface until the thaw. Then came the silence. As fall bled into winter and the snow began to settle over the campus, the urgency faded. Search efforts dwindled. The community returned to its routines, but for Josh's family and closest friends, time had frozen. One of the most devastating questions came from Hydakovich, still reeling from the loss of his friend. Was asked by the school if he would comfortable having another student move into Josh's now vacant dorm room. He declined. It was still Josh's space, and no one, not him, not Josh's parents, nor the search teams, was ready to accept that he was truly gone. But what if Josh hadn't just wandered off? What if the truth behind his disappearance was much more sinister? Over the years, alternate theories have emerged, some haunting, some bizarre. Was Josh targeted by someone he knew? Did he stumble across something? Or someone he shouldn't have? Could online interactions or campus secrets have played a role? Was there a cover-up that went deeper than anyone dared to admit? Josh Gimmond was smart. He was driven. He had enemies, perhaps the kind that come not from malice but from standing out, from asking too many questions, from refusing to blend in. Whatever happened on that cold November night, one thing is certain: someone out there knows more than they are saying. Brian Gimmond, Josh's father, grew increasingly frustrated with the sluggish pace and apparent apathy of the Stearns County Sheriff's Department. Determined to uncover the truth about his son's baffling disappearance, the Gimmond family decided to take matters into their own hands. On December 29, 2002, they enlisted the help of a private bloodhound, a last-ditch effort to trace Joshua's scent. The results were both startling and unnerving. The bloodhound led them on a meticulous trail, starting at a Nate Slinkard's apartment on Metten Court, then moving past the murky edges of Stump Lake, continuing to Josh's dorm at Senmore House, and finally arriving at the isolated stone-clad walls of St. John's Abbey. St. John's University, known for its rigorous academics and religious heritage, is unlike any ordinary campus. It houses a walking monastery where some of the resident monks double as professors. In recent times, and in the unsettling months leading up to Josh's vanishing, news of sexual abuse allegations involving this monk began to surface. For decades, disturbing stories had haunted the institution, tracing back to the 1960s, when the students whispered about inappropriate encounters with trusted staff. A particularly chilling case emerged in 1971 when a student named Jerry McCarthy accused Father Bruce Woolmering of abusing him under the guise of counseling at St. John's Abbey. Amidst this climate of institutional secrecy and scandal, Josh had been quietly drawn into the murky depths of these troubling allegations. He had been researching claims of abuse committed not only by monks but also by priests and other staff at the university. The evidence of a long history of disturbing behavior had profoundly disturbed him, so much so that it is believed that he may even have been working on a research paper that exposed these dark secrets. In a revealing digital footprint, records show that on October 3, 2002, either Josh himself or someone using his computer performed a search for St. John's Abbey Statute of Limitations conspiracy. This inquiry hinted at a man grappling with unsettling truths, and it lent an extra layer of complexity and menace to the case. While no concrete evidence has ever emerged linking the disappearance of Joshua to the alleged misconduct of university staff, the timing of his research could hardly be dismissed as mere coincidence. Over the years, the possibility that Josh may have unearthed secrets best left hidden has tantalized investigators and conspiracy theorists alike. Despite numerous leads and fervent efforts, the case has since stalled, with law enforcement unable or perhaps unwilling to push further into the shadows of St. John's. In recent developments, Joshua's father fought a bitter legal battle with Stearns County, seeking access to the case files in 2021. His aim was clear: to hold the investigation accountable for every stone left unturned. Yet the courts sided with the authorities, arguing that releasing the files could compromise ongoing investigative efforts, leaving the family and the many who still seek answers caught in a web of bureaucratic red tape and lingering mystery. This is a story where a determined father's quest for truth collides with the dark underbelly of institutional secrecy. A tale that leaves us questioning just how deep the roots of these hidden scandals might run, and whether Josh's disappearance was simply a tragic accident or the silent result of a cover-up that continues to haunt St. John's University to this day. As investigators scout every possible lead in Josh Gibbons' mysterious disappearance, an unsettling pattern began to emerge, one that reached beyond the quiet woods of St. John's University. Just days before Josh vanished, two other college-aged men also disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. On Halloween night, October 31st, 2002, Christopher Jenkins went missing in Minneapolis after being kicked out of a downtown bar. Less than a week later, on November 6th, Michael Knoll vanished in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, after a night out with friends. Both men were last seen walking alone. Both vanished without a trace. And in early 2003, both were found floating lifeless in nearby bodies of water, not far from where they were last seen. The grim discovery reignited speculation in Josh's case. Could his fate have mirrored Jenkins and Knoll's? Was there a serial offender lurking in the shadows of Midwest, preying on young men as they walked home alone at night? Fueled by these disturbing parallels, investigators returned to the lakes around St. John's University. Stumpf Lake, already searched in the days following Josh's disappearance, was examined again with renewed urgency. But this time, the search wasn't just led by law enforcement. Brian Gimmant, Josh's father, refused to sit back and wait. Armed with nothing more than a paddle and an aching heart, he took to the icy waters in a kayak, scanning the lake's surface and depths with his own eyes. And I just couldn't get over the thought that what if his body floated up right next to that kayak? Journalist David Wunze would later recall in Unsolved Mysteries. I mean, what would you do as a father? But once again, the search came up empty. No body, no belongings, no trace. With the theory of accidental drowning fading fast, investigators turned their attention back to the people closest to Joshua. If he hadn't wandered off in the lake, then someone may have led him or lured him somewhere else. Suspicion turned inward. It could have been a friend or a roommate. Lieutenant Vic Weiss said bluntly in Unsolved Mysteries. One of Joshua's roommates soon contacted the sheriff's department with the revelation. The night Josh disappeared, he had overheard a heated argument between Josh and their other roommate, Nick. The topic? Katie, a woman at the center of a complex and emotional triangle. Katie was Josh's ex-girlfriend. The two had dated for over 4 years, through high school and into college, before breaking up during their junior year. It wasn't a clean break. There were still feelings, unfinished business, and then came Nick. Just a few months after the breakup, he and Katie had started to explore the idea of dating. Though they ultimately decided against it, Nick's interest in Katie was no secret, and it may have stirred tension that hadn't yet cooled. Investigators took notice, especially when they compared Nick and Katie's official statements. Nick told investigators that he had left Katie's dorm around 2:30 a.m. on the night of November 9th, just a few hours after Josh was last seen. Campus keycard records confirm that he entered his dorm room at 2:42 a.m., but Katie told a different story. She remembered Nick leaving closer to 1 or 1:30 a.m. That left a gap, an unaccounted stretch of time, at least an hour, during a window in which Josh could have been harmed, or worse. The drive between Katie's dorm at St. Benedict's and Nick's dorm at St. John's was only about 7 to 10 minutes. So where was Nick during that lost hour? It was a kind of inconsistency that might seem small on its own, but in the context of a missing persons case, where every minute counts, it stood like a flare. And yet, despite the troubling timeline discrepancies, no arrests were made, no suspects were named, and no charges were filed. The investigation continued, but the pace slowed, the urgency waned, and the questions kept piling up. Was Josh's disappearance a tragic incident, like the cases of Jenkins and Knoll, or something far darker, buried under layers of secrets, shifting stories, and missed opportunities? And if someone close to Josh knows what really happened, why are they still silent? As the questions around Josh Gibbons' disappearance continued to mount, so did the sense that someone was being missed. The lakes had revealed nothing. The roommates' timelines were full of holes. Theories were beginning to stack like kindling, but no spark had yet cracked the case open. Then, investigators turned to something far more personal: Josh's digital life. A forensic search of Josh's computer uncovered fragments of online activity that hinted at a new, unnerving possibility, one that could explain the strange behavior the night he vanished. The data suggested that Josh might have planned a secret meetup with someone that night, someone he trusted or thought he did. It would explain why he left the party without warning, why he didn't take his coat, his wallet, or even say goodbye. And then came something even more chilling. From the records of St. John's Life Safety, the campus security team, an odd detail emerged. A bright orange Pontiac Sunfire had been seen on campus around the time Josh disappeared. This car wasn't just parked. It was seen in multiple locations across campus, places often associated with private meetups or late-night rendezvous. One night, life safety officers reported pulling up behind the Sunfire. That's when a college-aged male suddenly jumped out of the front seat and bolted, vanishing into surrounding woods. No name, no ID, just a shadow. A second report echoed the first, same car, same behavior, but once again, no clear identification of the runner. The life safety officer managed to speak briefly with the driver, who claimed he was simply dropping off a student. Suspicious, but not enough for an arrest. Still, officers recorded the plate number and car description. It could have been a lead, should have been a lead. But by the time the investigators followed up, the Pontiac Sunfire had already been crushed at a local scrapyard. Gone, just like Josh. If the car was ever connected to his disappearance, the trail was now cold, metal, reduced to fragments, and any potential forensic evidence lost forever. And so, authorities shifted their theory once more. Josh, they believed, may have been communicating with someone online. His activity on Yahoo Personals, a popular dating site at the time, suggested he was exploring connections, maybe even arranging to meet someone in person. At just 20 years old, curious and driven, Josh may have ventured into an encounter he never expected to turn dangerous. The dark underbelly of online interactions was far less understood in 2002 than it is today. Catfishing, online luring, and digital deception were already happening, but few realized the risks. And for someone like Josh, idealistic, trusting, and perhaps emotionally vulnerable after a recent breakup, this path might have seemed harmless. But what if it wasn't? What if the person on the other side of the screen wasn't a potential date but a predator? Despite the mounting possibilities, the case remained stalled. Leads fizzled, theories shifted, and the most crucial pieces of evidence, his computer, his last conversation, that orange Sunfire, only deepened the mystery. More than 2 decades later, we are still asking the same question. Did Josh Gimmond walk off into the night to meet a stranger or walk into a trap? In a haunting reflection of the silence that still surrounds Josh Gimmond's disappearance, advocate Patrick Marker offered a sobering thought. I hope it doesn't take a deathbed confession from a classmate, a monk, a law enforcement officer, or even a friend to finally bring the truth to light, Marcus said. But sadly, that may be exactly what it takes, and if that's the case, it's a tragedy, not just for Joshua, but for everyone who walked that campus alongside him. Marker, who has spent years exposing abuse tied to St. John's Abbey, didn't mince words about the weight of secrecy. Holding on to these kinds of truth, he said, it doesn't protect anyone. It corrodes the soul. People convince themselves they are staying silent for the right reasons. that they are protecting someone or preserving a legacy. But that silence is part of the problem. What we need now more than ever is for someone to step forward, to shine a light into the dark corners, to name the dishonesty, and finally confront the past. So many theories in this case, and I also have several. To understand one of the prevailing theories about Joshua Gayman's disappearance, you have to rewind the clock to the early 2000s, a time when internet chat rooms were still a relatively new frontier. It was the wild west of the digital age. Anonymous usernames, unmoderated chatbots, and screen names like XYZ@love or Holy Cat that often masked trolls or bored teenagers experimenting with a newfound virtual freedom. Many people, especially young men in college, used these spaces for mischief or late night trolling. It wasn't uncommon for someone to create a flirtatious or provocative profile just to stir the pot and then move on without consequence. So the question is this: was Joshua genuinely engaging in secret online conversations? Perhaps even meeting up with someone he encountered through a site like Yahoo, Personals, or was he just playing along, creating a silly username and dabbling briefly like so many of his peers? If Joshua spent consistent time chatting, forming connections, or even hinting at in-person meetups, then it's possible he became a target. Someone lured him away from his dorm under false pretenses. But if this was a one-time prank or a casual interaction, then the online theory may hold less weight. The difference is critical. And without direct access to those chat logs, we are left with speculation, uncertain whether a virtual persona led Joshua into a real-world danger. Joshua Gayman's disappearance isn't just a haunting mystery. It's a case that has left many a lingering sense of outrage, distrust, and heartbreak. And for good reason. Yes, St. John's University is nestled within acres of dense Minnesota woods. Yes, a tragic accident in such terrain, in theory, could go undiscovered for some time. But 20 years? 2 entire decades and not a single trace of Joshua. No clothing, no bones, no belongings, not even his watch. That silence is deafening. From the beginning, Stearns County officials leaned into the theory that Josh had somehow stumbled into a lake, most likely the one under the main bridge leading from I-94 into the university, prep school, and Abbey. A lake bordered by campus buildings, dormitories, and heavily trafficked paths. And still, nothing. No evidence, no closure, just theories. For many, it reeks of complacency, or worse, intentional inaction. People point to the disturbing parallels with Jacob Wetterling case, another child lost in Stearns County. That case too could have been solved swiftly, but instead, it took nearly 30 years to break. Why? Was it incompetence, a lack of will, or something darker? Political protectionism and fear of institutional scandal. And then there's the deeply unsettling conflict of interest. The county prosecutor's husband has deep personal ties to St. John's. Their children attend the prep school located on the very same grounds where Joshua vanished. Can we really believe the level of closeness wouldn't impact the vigor or direction of an investigation? Perhaps most disturbing of all was an overlooked tip. On the 90th anniversary of Josh's disappearance, a man left a public comment on the sheriff's department's post. He claimed that just weeks after Josh went missing, he had gone hunting on university-owned property near I-94 and discovered what exactly looked like a freshly dug grave. He tried several times to report this finding. Each time, he was ignored. And then, the comment disappeared. Deleted, erased. Whether it was removed by the sheriff's department or the commenter himself remains unclear. But it's a chilling detail, one that raises serious questions about how seriously new leads are being treated. If the department truly wants answers, why aren't they pursuing every possible clue? Why are they filtering what the public sees? Joshua Giemond was a future lawyer, a would-be politician, a young man driven by a deep sense of justice and public service. He wanted to make Minnesota a better place. Instead, he just vanished without a trace. And it feels like too many people are fighting for the justice he himself once believed in. For all the theories, the leads, and the haunting questions, Joshua Giemond's disappearance remains a chilling mystery, one that refuses to fade with time. Somewhere hidden beneath the surface of this quiet college town lies the truth waiting to be uncovered. And until that day comes, Joshua's story reminds us how fragile life can be, how important it is to keep searching, to keep asking, and to never let silence win. Because justice isn't about answers, it's about hope. And hope is what keeps us going.